everyone. We are going to get started in just about a minute. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Okay, we'll just give it about a minute or two to see if anyone will continue to keep joining us, and we'll dig right in. All right, I think we are going to go ahead and get started. It looks like we have our participants are trickling in, but let's go ahead and dig in. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon for our Bring Our Neighbors Home addressing juvenile detention. So certainly, for folks who, are joining us, hello. If this is your first webinar, welcome. If you have been with us for over the past month, you're learning a lot about our Bring Our Neighbors Home campaign, which is joining forces with our community partners in Colorado to end our over-reliance on incarcerating our most vulnerable friends and neighbors. So to continue our conversation this afternoon about pretrial level of our criminal legal system to end wealth-based detention, we're going to be discussing an issue that doesn't always get the attention that it deserves when we are discussing decarceration. And that is how the tendencies to over-incarcerate and to punish are being passed down to our children. As you'll learn today, we want to make our message clear. Detention harms our youth. Today, there are a little over 2 million people who are incarcerated behind bars across the US. In 2019, on any given day in this country, over 48,000 are youth who are confined in facilities away from their home. 2/3 of that youth are confined or held in what we consider really restrictive conditions, juvenile correctional style facilities. So even some of these youth are held in adult prisons and jails. And a lot of the problems that we see in the criminal legal system are also mirrored in the juvenile system: racial disparities, punitive conditions, and overcriminalization. So not only does detention impact a child's future prospects of finishing high school and can stabilize their adult lives later, it also impacts their families that love and support them. So as you can tell, we have a recurring theme going on in this series, and that is detention of any form is extremely harmful to the community. And so we have to continue to move away from its overuse to create new and better solutions that support people who need services or who need it. So today we're here to talk about some of these issues around juvenile detention and what's happening in Colorado specifically, and what you as our ACLU supporters, activists, members who are interested in these issues can do about them. So, the goals are going to be pretty straightforward. We'll talk about what it's like in juvenile jail, what the harmful effects of juvenile detention can be on our children, how the school to prison pipeline impacts or exacerbates these issues, what we're doing during our 2021 legislative session to change that, and then how you can get involved and help us organize to put it into some of the practices that we're seeing. So first off, I want to go in and introduce our first speaker. So if we're going to talk about juvenile jail, it's really important that we hear from voices who have had to experience it. So we're happy to introduce Lindsay Saunders Velez, the founder of the Colorado Justice Advocacy Network, which is an organization working to provide services to those who are caught in the youth offender system. Again, thank you, Lindsay, so much for joining us today. If you can take, a good 5-7 minutes, if you can, to talk a bit about who you are, what your experiences have been like in our Colorado's juvenile system, and what you're currently doing today with your organization with the Colorado Justice Advocacy Network.
Hi everyone. My name is Lindsay Saunders Velez, as she said. So the Colorado Justice Advocacy Network started while I founded the Colorado Justice Advocacy Network while I was a youth in the Division of Youth Corrections, now known as the Division of Youth Services. I founded this organization because the system is broken. The system has a great philosophy of rehabilitating people, but that's not what many people get out of the system. From the time you get there to the time that you leave, I believe you leave with a lot of trauma. I believe you leave more damaged than what you came in as. When I was housed in the Division of Youth Corrections, the very first thing that is traumatizing is you have to be strip searched. That's the worst thing to have to experience, especially as a kid, having a grown-up make you get undressed in front of them. It's scary, it's humiliating. And some of the things that youth go to jail for are just simple, harmless things. Not to say that youth don't commit serious offenses, but a lot of the things are just teenage behaviors. Does that mean that we need to go to jail for them? Probably not. Are there some offenses that juveniles commit that need to be corrected, but they don't need to go to jail? Yeah. Is jail the answer for everything? No. My organization focuses on people that are already in custody or in jail, youth detention, and they're having issues because they don't always get treated humanely. Some of them have staff use a lot of force on them for a simple request of go to their room, or if they're having a bad day and a staff member says the wrong thing to them and the kid kind of goes off, these kids are getting pretty messed up by staff. Or just to the simple fact they're not getting the mental health treatment that they need. We advocate to make sure that every youth is protected and gets the services that they need, and also to help reform our juvenile justice system.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for really kind of sharing with us, some of the things that you've seen, in our juvenile jails. Can you speak a little bit in terms of like this session, like some of the things that you are working on? I know you had mentioned that, now you're like testifying on bills that, can impact a community. Could you share a little bit about some of the work that you're doing for the legislative session? Oh, you're on mute.
For the legislative session right now, I don't have a lot of youth stuff going on, but I have a lot of reform going on in the adult system because the Colorado Justice Advocacy Network doesn't just focus on youth, it focuses on adults as well. One of the youth bills that I am taking a position on is youth that are in like foster care having the same access to services regardless of being in foster care, and also being transparent in the educational system while they're in foster care. Some of the bills that I'm taking a position on, which I'm doing this and waiting to testify on, is changes to our current felony murder statute, and also making sure that adults that come out of the Department of Corrections has all their identification, like ID, social security card, birth certificate, because that's a barrier for people to get like jobs and benefits. And it also is a main reason why a lot of people go back to prison, because they're not able to get a job. And you can't get a job unless you have an ID or social security card.
Thank you so much for sharing the work that you're doing. That's amazing. Certainly, I know that you are waiting to, as you mentioned, to testify right now. So if folks do have any questions for Lindsay, we ask that you put it in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So thank you so much. So with that, let's turn it over to Emma, who is our skating fellow here at the ACLU of Colorado, to talk a bit about, kind of playing off of what Lindsay had mentioned about how juvenile detention impacts our youth. And I will go ahead and get the screen back on. Can you see the screen okay? The slides okay?
I can, yes.
Awesome.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about juvenile detention and the harms that we know stem from juvenile detention, and then a little bit about one of the aspects that's kind of unique to the juvenile side of this work, which is the school to prison pipeline, and how schools are pushing kids out and into the criminal legal system. All right, let's start with, we have too many young people in detention. So when I talk about detention, I'm talking about conditions of secure confinement. So those conditions that Lindsay was just talking about, being held in what people talk about as a juvenile jail. So as of today, March 18th, as of today, March 18th, 2021, we are holding 144 kids in detention today. Some of those kids are there for what we call technical violations, which are normal things that become criminalized through involvement in the criminal legal system. So I'm talking about things like missing appointments, violating probation conditions, very kind of small things that draw people into this severe confinement. And another important thing to remember about these 144 kids that are sitting in detention right now is very often these kids are sitting in detention because there aren't enough shelter placements and foster homes to house them. So there are other appropriate placements for these young people that are less restrictive, but because we don't have enough of them, they are sitting in detention waiting for placement. So, also important to note, almost 70% of youth being held in juvenile jails are there for nonviolent offenses. So we're really talking about kids that are committing crimes against property and status offenses. So things that would not be illegal for an adult to do, like drink alcohol, that are illegal because the person is a minor. Detention also disproportionately impacts youth of color. So white children are much more likely to get what's called a summons when they have an interaction with a police officer. A summons is like a ticket that says, come to court and answer for this charge. So the child is not picked up and detained. They're allowed to go home and then to return to court. Black and Latinx kids are much more likely to be arrested in that same situation, and rather than given a summons. So they will spend time in jail pre-trial. In Colorado, Black youth are more than 4 times as likely to be detained as white youth. So we have a huge, huge disparity. Latinx youth are almost twice as likely to be detained as Black youth, or sorry, as white youth, excuse me. And on average, Black youth spend more time in detention than white youth, and more time in detention by a significant amount, several weeks. Okay, detention harms kids. This is true across the board. So we know that detention inflicts a vast variety of harms on different kids differently. So for all kids, they are less likely to graduate from high school, less likely to consistently work as adults, and more likely to be incarcerated as adults than kids who are not detained. And sometimes people kind of come back to this information and say, oh, well, is it just that the kids who are being detained are also the kids who are growing up in poverty, or the kids who are being detained are also the kids who are experiencing abuse at home? And sometimes that's true, but these studies that give us these numbers, kids are less likely to graduate, less likely to be employed consistently, are controlled for those things. So we're looking at only the impact of detention, and detention makes kids less likely to succeed later in life, holding all other things equal. Detention disproportionately impacts some groups of children. So LGBTQ kids are much more likely to be sexually assaulted in jail than their straight peers. And that's true both of sexual assault by staff and of sexual assault by other youth. So detention for LGBTQ kids is a huge, huge risk of experiencing sexual violence. Kids with disabilities are much less likely to receive appropriate services in detention. But not only that, they are also much less likely to re-enter school after they are released. And of the kids who re-enter school, those kids are even less likely to graduate than their non-disabled peers. Now, one of the things that people kind of come back at this list of harms with is, okay, well, yes, detention does all these harmful things, but what if it works? Right? Like, what if we detain kids and then they commit fewer crimes? Well, detention doesn't work. So all of our empirical evidence shows that kids who are detained, who are kept in secure facilities, commit more subsequent crimes than kids who are released and supervised in the community. So not only is detention incredibly, incredibly harmful, but it also does not work. So one of the big impacts of detention is an impact on youth's experience of mental illness. So 2 aspects here. First, detention can cause mental illness in children. So children who were not exhibiting symptoms of mental illness before they were detained begin to exhibit symptoms of mental illness in jail. This is particularly strong for clinical depression. And then the other thing detention can do is it can take existing mental illness and make it a lot worse very quickly. So as you can see, we have these kind of terrifying numbers. As many as 1/3 of incarcerated young people become clinically depressed after incarceration, and rates of suicidal ideation among detained youth are super duper high. One of our Better Oregon studies found that 24% of detained youth expressed a desire to imminently act on suicidal urges. Okay, cash bail. So one of the things that we do in Colorado is we hold young people pretrial for money. So when a child is arrested, bail may be set, money bail, saying to the parents, okay, you can come and get your child and bring them home pretrial, but you have to pay us $2,000 or whatever the bail amount is. So under that system, a young person whose parents have money can go home before trial, while a young person with poor parents has to sit in jail. We're in the minority of states that allow cash bail for children. Most states do not. And there is no evidence that the imposition of cash bail, whether we're talking about children or adults, protects public safety or makes people more likely to return to court. So here I'll just take a moment to discuss a recent lawsuit that the ACLU has filed that bears on the issue of cash bail and also on the school to prison pipeline. So the ACLU filed suit on behalf of a kid, AV, who's now 12, against the Douglas County School District, the Douglas County Sheriff, and several individual school resource officers. So those police officers that are stationed in and working in schools. After those officers in the Douglas County School District aggressively handcuffed AV, who at the time was 11 years old, a Hispanic child with autism, and left him in a patrol car for several hours. He became so dysregulated that he banged his head repeatedly and sustained serious injury. Without seeking medical attention, the officers drove the child to a juvenile detention center and placed him in custody until his parents were able to post a $25,000 bond. So they were holding this 11-year-old child until his parents were able to come up with $25,000. And I just want to share a couple of words from his mother that were very impactful to me. She said, describing kind of the aftermath of this arrest and AV being held pending them coming up with this money. It's obviously a really large amount of money. When we saw him, his forehead and arms were so swollen and bruised. He doesn't headbang. He must have been extremely dysregulated. After we bailed him out, he wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak. He was and is definitely traumatized. We all are. So as a result of being handcuffed, being left in the patrol car, and then being left in custody for hours solely so that his parents could raise money, AV now suffers from severe anxiety and PTSD. So keep an eye on our website for updates on that lawsuit. All right, so back to the question of does it work, right? It harms kids, but does it work? No. Not only do we have empirical evidence saying that treatment in the community is better at reducing recidivism, we also have historical evidence across the country that when states reduce juvenile confinement, incarcerate fewer kids, they have fewer juvenile arrests for violent crimes. So between 1997 and 2007, the percent of kids in correctional confinement declined by 24%. During that same period, juvenile arrests for violent crime decreased by 27%. So we can see those lines running together. As jailing kids becomes less common, juvenile violent crime becomes less common also. All right, now I'm gonna chat a little bit about the school to prison pipeline. So I'm sure most people on this webinar are familiar with that term, but in case you're not, the school to prison pipeline is the process by which young people are pushed out of schools through various disciplinary proceedings, suspension, expulsion, and pushed into the criminal legal system. We are seeing the school to prison pipeline become much more prominent as a mechanism by which kids get wrapped up in the criminal legal system. So school discipline has become more severe over time. So out of school suspensions have increased about 10% since 2000, and they have more than doubled since the 1970s. So more and more kids are being suspended and expelled from school. School discipline disproportionately impacts Black and Indigenous people of color. Black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than white students nationally. And we'll talk about the Colorado statistics shortly. So after the 1998 shooting at Columbine High School, kind of an interesting tie to Colorado in the national statistics, administrators started relying more and more heavily on actual police. So those are those school resource officers I was just talking about, police that are stationed in the schools themselves. From 1997 to 2007, the number of school resource officers increased by nearly a third. So we have many, many more cops in schools, which facilitates this transfer between the school disciplinary system and the criminal legal system. school resource officers mean things that used to be disciplinary issues become criminal ones. Even controlling for a school's poverty level, schools with school resource officers had 5 times as many arrests for disorderly conduct as schools without them. So you'll see up on your screen are some statistics about racially disparate impact of arrests in schools and school discipline in Colorado schools. So you'll see that the average length of suspension for Colorado students varies dramatically based on the race of the student. So Black students have an average length of suspension of 38 days compared to 12 days for a white student. That's more than 3 times the amount of suspended time. And share of population in schools versus share of in-school arrests by race also reflects this racial disparity. So you'll see that white students make up 71% roughly of kids in Colorado schools, and they make up 47% of arrests happening in Colorado schools. So underrepresentation, right? Not as many white children are being arrested in schools as we would predict from their share of the population. And then we see that only 5% of the children in Colorado schools are Black, but they make up 19% of the students arrested in Colorado schools. So massive overrepresentation. And I think that is the end of my segment. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat. And now Elise Logeman is going to talk about the policy change that we have worked on at the ACLU.
Thanks, Emma. So after hearing about all the dire effects of detention on kiddos, we want to give you some hope that there is actually a way to make changes to help kids. And we've been able to do it in the past. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, you can go to the next slide if you're, thanks, about some work that we've done in the past around seclusion and restraint, just to emphasize that there's a lot of different ways that you can go about participating in this process to make changes for kids. We, a few years ago in 2016 and 2017, knew that there were kids in custody who were getting restrained by staff quite a bit and who were getting locked alone in rooms quite often in what I would call solitary confinement, what the Division of Youth Services calls seclusion. And we tried to work with the division to make changes, and we weren't making progress. And so we went and we talked with kids and families, and we took their stories and created a written report that we publicized in the media. And then we made changes through both legislation and through policy to try and stop what you see happening here in this slide, which is the horrific use of this device here. I think there's a bigger picture on the next slide called the wrap. Which is something that the Division of Youth Services used to literally just wrap children in and then carry them into a space and leave them alone when they were misbehaving. We don't have to look at that for too long. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to make change. What ended up happening is we got policy changes within the division, as well as a couple of bills passed that resulted in a very large decrease in the use of solitary confinement in our facilities. So we had in that study kids who were kept on plans where they were isolated for almost all of the day for months and months at a time. One kid cumulatively for over a year of the time he was in the division. And now the average stay when they separate youth and put them in another room is less than an hour across the board at the facilities. So that's a pretty drastic change that we were able to achieve. And it took a lot of work, and it took a combination of a bunch of different kinds of work. And so there's all sorts of different ways that you can jump in to help. We did not have as much success. We had some success, but not as much success at eliminating the restraints that are in the division. That's still a problem that we continue to watch. That, you know, the picture of the sort of bruising you saw in that slide is a picture of rug burns on a kid's face from being dragged across the floor at a facility by staff members. And we still hear reports of that kind of thing happening today. So there's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of culture change that we need to make in the Division of Youth Services to keep things like that from happening to children. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that kids who don't need to go into detention aren't going there in the first place. And that's what we're working on in the immediate future that I want to talk to you about now. So right now, in front of the legislature, we have a bill, Senate Bill 71, that is trying to limit the number of children that can go behind bars in our state. Right now, Colorado is allowed to have, that number is wrong, I'm sorry, 327 people in detention at any given time under statute. That's our current limitation on how many kids can go into custody on any given day. But we weren't using that number before COVID. Before COVID, we usually had between 240 and 260 kids in detention. The average number for the year before COVID was actually 240 kids a day in custody across the state. During COVID, we limited that number to 188. And we haven't actually seen more than 188 kids in custody for the whole past year from March to March during COVID. And during that time, we have not seen an increase in juvenile violent crime. And what we've seen is the most of the kids who aren't being arrested and locked up behind bars anymore are the kids who were being arrested and locked up for things like trespass, criminal mischief, which is minor property crime, damage. You know, that could be, I've had kids charged with that for, you know, drawing with a Sharpie on a bathroom wall at school. You know, low-level drug possession crimes, low-level property crimes. Those are the things that we're not putting kids behind bars for anymore. And that's exactly as it should be. We don't need to put kids through strip searching and separation from their families and sitting overnight in a cell in a metal bed frame for a lot of the conduct that lands kids in the criminal justice system. So we've introduced a bill through a lot of negotiation. The bed cap number in that bill is now 215. So it would limit the number of young people going forward, even after COVID, that we can detain on any given day to 215 kids across the state. And the other thing that it does is it eliminates cash bail. And right now we have some jurisdictions, some don't use cash bail at all with children, but we have some jurisdictions like the youth that you just heard Emma talking about, the 11-year-old who was held on $25,000 bond, who are still setting money bail for kids. And that just doesn't make sense because, you know, we want to use detention as sparingly as possible, only for children who actually pose a danger and we have no other option, right? And so if they're not in that category, then they should be released and parents shouldn't have to pay money to get them out. So this bill will end the practice of cash bail for kids entirely, which is exciting. So, and I also see a question in the chat about restorative justice and how has restorative justice made an impact. There's actually another bill that if you're interested in restorative justice that you might be interested in that I just testified on this afternoon to assist in increasing access to diversion, which is something that we did a couple sessions ago too in a different bill, Senate Bill 19-108. And we are continually trying to use statute to sort of force folks to incorporate restorative justice practices into all parts of the system, but especially at the beginning, if we can divert kids, get them into a restorative justice model rather than having them go through the system. So there are a lot of efforts on different committees across the state and then also through some legislation to increase access to restorative justice. And if you're interested in that, that's definitely another way that you can get involved. So in regard to legislative action, one super easy way to get involved is just to contact your representatives. Everybody has a state representative and a state senator that represent them. You can find your legislator online. I think there's a little, yeah. So this will sort of walk you through how to do it. But you can go to the Colorado General Assembly website, go to the Find Your Legislator page, insert your street address wherever you live, and it will just pop up and tell you exactly who to contact and how to contact them. So it's super simple. And the people at the legislature right now, you know, because of COVID, there's not as many people in the legislature and it's not as easy to go in person. So they are getting a lot of emails and calls, and they have been responsive to that because that's how they're getting their feedback from their constituents. So it really can make a difference if they're hearing from people about a particular bill that people want supported. And then you can also, this is showing you, see the district that you're in if you want to see what district is covered by the representative that represents you. And everybody, all of the legislators have their contact information right online, the phone number, and you can just click a button to send an email. So it's super easy to contact them. So you can use this method to contact any state legislator about any issue. Some of you were asking about some bill numbers in the Q&A, and I put some in there. And I also put in a link so that you can look up any bill you're interested in. You can go on and, you know, just search for juvenile if you want, or search, you know, for other search terms that are of interest to you and find bills that you want to follow. And you can use this to contact representatives about any bill. If you want to support our detention bill, then on the next slide, there is a link that makes it really easy. Oh, we have here a sample paragraph that you can use if you want to support our detention bill. You can write this in an email. You can edit it, you know, to fit what you want to say. You can say it on the phone, leave a message. But this is just a little quick script that you can use to explain why you support the bill.
And just to let folks know that after the webinar, we will be providing slides, and I'll talk a little bit about our social media toolkit, which will have some of this information you can use to contact your legislators.
Thanks. And then there's a really easy link in regard to the detention bill right here. If you click on this, it'll take you straight to our website, and you'll be able to just put in your address. It'll send it to your legislator automatically. It has a message on there that you can edit super easily. It's a really easy way to show your support if you are interested in supporting that effort. But there are also lots of other ways that you can get involved with us, and Jessica's going to talk to you about some of those.
Yes, and I'll work to also put the link also in the chat as well to contact legislators. So thank you so much. And I feel like I did not do justice by introduction. So Elise Logeman is our is it like ACLU Juvenile Policy Council, like on juvenile justice issues. And Emma McLean-Riggs is our, again, our Skaden Fellow that has been really working with Elise this legislative session to really kind of put forward these bills in the Capitol to our representatives, really on behalf of our children. So, you know, definitely when we say that we are working, you know, for civil rights and civil liberties for all Coloradans, that includes our children as well. Okay, so, you know, let's go and take action, how you can help. As Elise, you know, definitely mentioned, you know, and we will be providing some information for you in terms of you can contact your legislators about SB 71 and having them support, you know, the bill. We'll be providing information for you in terms of fact sheet based on kind of everything that we talked about in this webinar, as well as even a social media toolkit if you want to contact, again, your legislators, or, you know, as it begins, you know, as the bill continues to move through the process, if we need your help, you know, contacting specific legislators, how you can go about that as well. But of course, you know, in addition to that, you know, again, this is a webinar series, and this all kind of comes together in terms of how are we bringing our most vulnerable neighbors back home from the overuse of incarceration. So certainly you can access our previous recordings in the webinar series either by going to our ACLU of Colorado channel on YouTube or on our website at aclu-co.org. also. You can also put in the chat as well. We've been asking folks if they want to learn more, as things are beginning to develop, because, again, when it comes to the legislative session, nothing ever goes the way that you think it should go. But if you want to get updates, if you're really interested in working, particularly on juvenile detention, you can definitely go to our Airtable, sign up. We have where you can select, a variety of different issues and campaigns that we're working on. And there is the Bring Our Neighbors Home that you can select as well. So as we are wrapping up, definitely want to let you know of some upcoming webinars that we are having. Certainly, if you have experienced or you know someone who you think would be interested in testifying, this legislative session, we will be having a training session on the story of self, in terms of how do we use our experiences, whether it's personally or in our community, to really then take that and make a message of change, and particularly on this piece, the policy piece. So we will be having 2 trainings that are coming up next week on the story of self, and that is Tuesday, March 23rd at noon, and then we'll have a later session, March 25th on a Thursday at 4 p.m. And then last but not least, of course, as we are wrapping up our webinar series, we do have one more that we would like for you to participate in, and that is the discussion about our reproductive fundamental Bill of Rights that we will be talking about. And again, really kind of understanding how this all plays into our criminal legal system, and how we are jailing folks, and the ways that it impacts their lives on many levels. So that our last installment for the series will be on Tuesday, March 30th, and that will be at noon. And then of course, certainly if you have, questions, or you really want to tap in, get involved in terms of, what's coming up next with SB 71, we have our contact information here. We'll also share that information out at the end of the webinar, along with the other resources that we plan on sharing with people. And so with that, I will open it up for questions. I'm sure folks have plenty, but since we have our policy team that's working on juvenile detention and getting our kids out, there are experts in this area. So please, I'm having a hard time kind of looking at the Q&A for some reason. While I'm in share screen, it doesn't open it up. So I don't know if Elise, Emma, or Delana can see the Q&A and what our audience is asking.
We have a thank you, which is nice. Thank you, Beth, for joining us. And then we have can you share the Airtable link here?
Yes, let me see if I can grab it.
And let me check the chat, Jessica, while you're doing that, and see if we have anything else.
Okay. Let's see.
So I think Jessica's mentioned a couple of times that we will be sending out the links, chat, the slides, and there'll be a recording of this on our website before long, probably tomorrow. So I hope that answers those questions. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, but if there are any questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. And Jessica just put the Airtable in the chat for us, so great. And I put the links in the chat to the upcoming trainings. I put them in twice, so thorough. All right, doesn't look like we have any more questions coming, so we'll give it another second. But this was great, as usual, learned so much.
Oh, and then you went on mute.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. I learned a ton. This was great.
Well, again, thank you for those, you know, who have been going on this journey with us, you know, since we started, you know, doing the webinar series back in, you know, the beginning of February. It really does show, you know, again, how over incarcerating our community members really can impact so many levels in our society and our lives. And so definitely it was really important to give space to this topic. And again, just thanking Lindsay for, you know, sharing her story and providing, you know, and being a voice in the community that can really shed light on the realities of juvenile jail.
Well, thanks, everybody. I
Yeah.
see a lot of people on here who have, you know, all sorts of backgrounds with kids, educators, folks in the defense community, people doing other stuff. So, you know, if you, whatever your area of interest may be, you don't hesitate to sort of get on our list. There's all sorts of things that we work on to try to make things better for kids, and we're happy to have you.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.